This is Group Vostok 1.
I'm Cadet Grossenberger.
I'm Cadet Brandon King.
I'm Cadet Burton Barber, and I am also going to be the hometown hero, Yuri A. Gagarin.
Okay, next slide. Oh, our mission was the Vostok 1. The Vostok's project's intentions were to be the first manned space flight up into space. It was launched on April 12, 1961 in Kazakhstan from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The crew size was of one single cosmonaut, and it lasted 1 hour and 48 minutes, which was basically 2 hours. Oh, this was a political cartoon of the Cold War. It was the Soviets against us, and we were racing up to space. Next one.
It all started with the space race, and it was basically between US and Russia, and it was basically a race to see who can get what into space first, which everyone eventually turned to getting the first person into space. And Neil Armstrong was actually the first man to land on the moon.
So the first person into space was I, Yuri A. Gagarin. I was a Soviet cosmonaut. I trained for 2 years for an almost 2-hour space flight. Basically, we were in the space race against the US to be the first country up into space, and we won. Thus, after becoming an international celebrity, audited many awards, one of them including the Hero of the Soviet Union. Although the Vostok 1 was my only space flight, I was the backup crew for the Soyuz 1, which ended up crashing. Thank God I wasn't on that, right? Next slide.
Mr. Gagarin's first space flight was his only flight. Although he made history, 7 years later he was history.
No.
There we go. There we go. Mr. Gagarin was training for his second flight into space when on March 27th, 1968, he was aboard a MiG-15 training another pilot, and supposedly there are rumors that it was another fighter pilot that got a little too close to him and crashed, either on purpose or on accident. But they said that he just attempted to avoid a foreign object.
The cost of the mission was 2 to 3 million rubles, which is Russian currency, or Soviet Union currency, excuse me, which would be around $3 million US today, or back then. I can't remember. It took anywhere from 4 to 10 years to build the Vostok 1, and it might have taken a little bit longer. Russia never has a clear answer for anything.
The night before the mission, well, just to start off, all of the people who were involved on the mission were told not to speak of the mission at all, especially the night before. We were offered sleeping pills to get better sleep and also to be monitored the night before. But both Titov and Korolev they both couldn't sleep due to pre-space flight anxiety.
And Titov and Korolev were the backups or the people who were a part of the ground control. Next slide. So the launch. It was a 10-minute launch and everything went as planned. During the flight, he went in and out of daylight once, so he got to witness a day in about an hour. passed over the South Atlantic in the daylight again. Next slide. As you can see, Colonel taught us about where to launch your vehicle so the stuff doesn't drop into any of the countries. So we went over here, and then through here, and then next slide. This slide. The entire mission was controlled by autopilot ground control. So besides pressing a couple buttons in there, everything was done at the cosmic. This was the actual launch that was on TV. That was the launch that sent the first man into space.
So, landing of the Vostok was nearly a 40-second burn, a braking of the engine, but still successfully landed. It was a single valve propellant lines that failed to close at the beginning of the burn that led to an empty tank. With wild pressure between the gas and the oxidizer, the result made the vehicle spin crazy, which is called gyration.
At this point, when the wires broke, the two modules separated, and the descent module settled into the proper re-entry attitude. Gagarin telegraphed everything is okay despite the continuing gyrations. When you enter the flames and everything, you can't really radio in to the main people, but he was spinning out of control, and he said everything was fine. He actually jumped out of his parachute 7 kilometers before he actually landed. And the Vostok vehicle itself landed just fine. Next slide. This is a game, but
It's a recreation of what happened when he was re-entering Earth's atmosphere.
so this is when that thing departed. It was flying over and it's trying to re-land. And it's about right here when the flames start happening that he was gyrating and he could not telegraph that everything was okay to the main people. It doesn't show it in the model, but this is where he was spinning out of control.
Not the original cockpit at all.
It was about right here where he could tell them that everything was okay, and then he finally deployed.
And it kind of didn't land like that. It was basically like a ejection seat. He basically ejected out of his capsule and parachuted down. Just like that.
And then yay, he landed. Okay. That was the Vostok after it landed. Next slide. This was a political cartoon. Of course, after the space flight, there was a lot of taunting between U.S., Soviet Union. A lot of political cartoons came out making fun of him. The political cartoon says,
Russian spaceman
says the world looks blue. Because there was just a lot of taunting. They could have made it farther, but they were too busy to get into space in general. Next slide.
So after everything was said and done, there was of course some rumors and taunting. The Soviets continued to celebrate. He soon became a pilot instructor. So yeah.
That is how you died.
That is how I died. There was some talk going around saying that they weren't going to count it as a successful and complete mission because he did not land with his spacecraft where it was supposed to land. So.
In today's news, because he did not land with his space vehicle, Gagarin's falsified flight record, that is the name of this news article if you would want to read it. You don't have to. Okay. They claim that his first flight was, they claim that he was the first man in space, but his landing was falsified. It was called into question if his name should even be in the history books because Gagarin never landed with his launch vehicle. The FAI determined that it was not a valid trip, even considering the time of technology's advancements compared to today. The FAI is like the main people. It is a Russian word, but it basically means like they're in charge of air sports. Anything that happens in the air, anything that happens in space, they make the rules. Next slide.
In conclusion, the Vostok was launched in Moscow, Russia on April 12, 1961. The mission took one complete orbit. It took about an hour and 48 minutes, almost 2 hours. The Vostok 1 was intended to be the winning flight in the space race by the Soviet Union. The first man into space was Yuri Gagarin, and the trip costed about 2 to 3 million rubles, which was the Soviet Union's currency back then, and 3 million in US.
If you guys want to take a second to write this down, these are the answers and the notes to the questions.
You'll also have access to them online, so if you don't want to write them down, you can look them up.
I'm going to make that quick 10 seconds for those who are still writing. Pictures, yeah.
You have anything after this?